Today is August the 11th, 2015. This is the interview of Donna Palmer by Noah Levinson. We are in Detroit, Michigan at the Detroit Historical Museum, and this interview is for the Detroit Historical Society and the Detroit 1967 Oral History Project. Donna, could you first tell me where and when were you born?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1942, November 5th, 1942.
And how long did you live in Pittsburgh for?
Until I was 9 years old and I moved to Detroit.
Okay. And can you tell me about, first off, what part of Detroit did you move to when you were 9?
Actually, it's sort of southwest around Myrtle, Temple, that area, 16th, 17th, 18th Street, in that area, close to the train station, the old train station off of Michigan Avenue. That's where I spent a lot of my life there.
How long did you live in that neighborhood for?
Probably until I got married at 21. So I was there for at least until I was 21, 22 years old.
What do you remember about the train station when you first saw it and when you were first living in the neighborhood there?
Oh, it was a beautiful place. It was a lovely place just to go and visit, just to walk through it.
Even without needing to go on somewhere on the train?
Right. They had lots of stores. It's so sad the way it is now as to the way it compared to before. I think it should be preserved and saved.
I've heard they actually just, I forget who, but whoever owns it is paid to put 1,000 or so new windows on the building. So hopefully that's the first step in refurbishing it.
The
finally.
inside is beautiful.
Yeah.
The architect is so beautiful. It should really be preserved.
Is there anything specific you remember about how it looks or how it looked?
How it looked back then?
Yeah.
Huge inside, big area, large area inside, lots of sculptures. The inside of it was a lot of sculptures. My uncle traveled a lot, so we were back and forth at the train station, either dropping him off or picking him up. And we used to go down there, just to go down there as kids and just run around in the station until they run us out. You know, on one side of Michigan Avenue was the black neighborhood, and on the other side of Michigan Avenue was the Hispanic neighborhood. So the Michigan Avenue actually separated the blacks from the Hispanics back then.
Was there any sort of tension or animosity?
There was
between the
animosity and tension between the Hispanics and the blacks, so we knew to stay on our side of Michigan Avenue, and they knew to stay on their side of Michigan Avenue.
Did you ever have any first-hand experiences sort of related to that tension?
Well, growing up as a teenager, I had boyfriends that were in gangs that would fight. They would have what they call rumbles, and back then they fought with their fists, and they would have fights back and forth.
With other Hispanic gangs then?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, it's funny because that's the way it is today. Hispanics are on one side of Michigan Avenue, and the rest of the people are on the other side of Michigan Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
So we call it Mexican Town now. All of that area over there is Mexican Town.
Right. So you could walk to the train station from your house?
From my house.
Wow.
They used to have an Eastern market over there. There was we have a Eastern market now, but they used to have a Western market, just like the one on the east side here.
Really?
We had the same thing. One was on the west side, one was on the east side, Eastern market.
Was that open every day or on the weekends? Or?
On the weekends, mostly on the weekends.
Farmers?
Mm-hmm, for farmers to come in and bring their stuff. And there was lots of what they call meat markets down in through there. A lot of factories that sold a lot of wholesale stuff in through that area. So it was a pretty industrial area right along there. The train came through there, so there was a train from the train station. Trains would come through there, and there was also trains that would deliver goods in that area. So there were train tracks. And that was sort of like a mark for us, too, not to go on the other side because we didn't cross the tracks. When you crossed the tracks, you were in the Mexican, Hispanic area. and on this side was the black area.
What do you remember about the part of your neighborhood that was right where you lived, like the several blocks around where you live?
We had lots of churches. There were a lot of big churches there. I went to Jefferson Junior High School. We weren't too far from the projects. So I sort of grew up with people like the Motown people. So we went to school with the Temptations.
Wow.
The Supremes. One of my best friends sang with Martha Reeves and the Vandellas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we were there with Smokey and all the others in that area. We had, back then, we had where they used to have talent shows. And a lot of the talent shows would be held in the church, the one big church. I can't remember the name of it, but one big church would have the talent shows. And we would have the non-famous people at that time, such as the Temptations and Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. They weren't really big hits back then. And they would sing David Ruffin and the Temptations. And so there was a lot. We had a lot of nightclubs. We had a couple of nightclubs in that area, not too far over on Woodward, the Greystone Ballroom. We had different the 20 Grand were sort of like nightclubs in that area. I wasn't old enough at the time to get in, but we used to sneak in. Me and my girlfriend used to sneak in. We actually would take her sister's ID and show it to the man at the door, and then we would put it behind our back and slip it to the next person. And we got away with that for a long time until one day the guy said, "Hey, wait a minute, how many of the same people, am I seeing here?" So we would do that to get in to see those guys singing. And it was just it was really good. It was a good time in the city of Detroit. We had a good time. We didn't have to worry about our doors. We could leave our doors open. Everybody knew everybody in the neighborhood. So if anything happened, everyone was involved in the neighborhood. So it was a good time. Old Tiger Stadium was still there. It was right off of Trumbull there. One of the places I lived was right down from Tiger Stadium on Spruce Street. So we'd go to the Tiger Stadium, walk down there. So all that was in the area, Tiger Stadium, the old train station, right around in that area.
Wow. What do you remember about downtown at that time?
We really didn't go too much downtown. Oh, Hudson's was still there. I have a picture of Hudson's building before they tore it down. Crawley's was downtown. So by us being sort of poor, we really didn't get a chance to shop downtown. The well-off people, the well-to-do people shop mostly downtown. And where's Kresge's dime store, 5 and Dime. There was Saunders. They would have ice cream, what do you call Sundays?
Sure. Yep, cream puffs.
Cream puffs. So every once in a while when Mom would get paid and she had a little extra money, she'd take us downtown. We'd go to Saunders and get some ice cream. Or either we go to, one of the joys was to go to Hudson's and ride the elevator up and down all the way to the top floor and then back down again, or Crawley's. So they had another building down, Klein's they had down there, I think B. Siegel's. Those are some of the stores that were downtown. Now all that is gone now. I remember when they blew Hudson's up and demolished it, and I got pictures of it before they did that. But yeah.
What kind of work did your parents do?
My mother, she was a single mom. She did domestic work. So most of her work was in the suburbs.
Okay.
So she would have to ride the bus to places such as Oak Park and Southfield, and in that area where it was all white, it was not black. Especially Northwest Detroit, it was all Jewish area.
Right.
So she would go out there and and do domestic work, and she was a nanny. She worked for 2 or 3 members of one family. So it was like she worked for the mother, and then she worked for the daughters, and maybe the son. She would do certain days for them. So she worked for like one family. They were nice to her. They would give her a lot of stuff. And I remember her coming home with a lot of leftover stuff from the refrigerator. And it was like, take this home to your kids and feed it to your kids. And she would take it, but she would say, why would I have to feed my kids leftover food from your refrigerator?
Yeah.
So she would bring it home anyway. They would give her clothes for me, and stuff like that. So they were very nice in that way. They just felt like she needed the food from the refrigerator. So
Did you have siblings growing up?
I had one brother,
Older or younger?
younger. He's a couple of years younger than
And can you tell me about the schools that you went to in Detroit?
I. We went to public school. It was the schools were pretty good back then. They cared about you learning. You might have some teachers that really believe in discipline. So we were disciplined when we did something in school. We were disciplined for it.
When you say that, do you mean like physical, or do you mean
Paddle. Sometimes
Okay.
we'd get our hands paddled.
Wow.
Sometimes standing in the corner. Sometimes in the clothes closet, in the coat closet, we would have to stand in there. So, of course, I never really did anything to be disciplined.
you were good?
I was a goodie. And I went to Jefferson Junior High School, which is right across the freeway there, the large freeway, and that's where most of everyone in that neighborhood went. And junior high, the projects was there, so you'd have to go through the projects to get to school. The school was pretty good. It was mostly all black students went there. The projects was pretty rough, so it was a rough ordeal just to go through the projects to get to the school. You had to almost think about fighting for your life in order to make it to the other side, because you might get beat up, jumped on and beat up for no reason at all. They might not like the way you look.
Every day you had to worry about that?
Not every day, but when you see groups of kids together and they like to fight. So it was a lot of tension there. It was a lot of standing their grounds. The fact that you come from outside of the projects and come through their area. Yeah.
I see. And where, you said you moved when you got married. Where was that to?
I moved in the area, and I moved all over the area. We were on Collingwood. We lived on Blaine, Gladstone, all those areas we moved. What happened is that the man that owns, I don't know if he still does, but he used to own the St. Regis Hotel on the boulevard. They considered him as a slum landlord back then. He owned a lot of apartment buildings in that area. If you're talking Dexter, Martin Luther King Boulevard, Rosa Park, all that area, he owned apartment buildings. And when I got married, well, actually, I moved there before I got married. My mother moved us there, so I was in my mother's house just for a short period of time before I got married. In fact, I still lived there after I got married. And then we soon moved out, got an apartment of our own. And so the landlord, the guy that owned the buildings, thought we were such a nice couple. So he decided to make us caretakers of one of his buildings. So our job was, we got a free apartment, and our job was to collect the rent, and my husband was to do the general maintenance. If it was anything that was like heavy maintenance, then they had people to come in and do that. So that's what we did.
Which building was that in, on which street?
I can't remember whether it was Seward or whether it was Blaine, but it was one of those buildings on Seward or Blaine.
And was your husband working then too?
Yeah, he was working at Chrysler, so he would do the maintenance work when he worked nights. In fact, he was working General Motors and Chrysler's because he was trying to make enough money to get us out of that neighborhood. So I was really then here. We had one kid and then another one on the way. So he was like, I got to really get us out of this neighborhood before the oldest one is old enough to go to school. I don't want him to go to school in this area.
Gotcha.
So I stayed at home, and I would do the, God, excuse me. I would do the general maintenance. Like if somebody moved out of the apartment building, I would go and clean it. If
The
it
empty
was
apartment.
the empty apartment, and get it ready for another tenant to show. I would show the apartments in the daytime, and he would do the heavy work. Mostly all of the his buildings, the heat was coal heat, so he had coal furnaces there. So what happens is that someone would have to fill up the coal bin. I don't know if you remember the old coal furnaces and used to feed the coal into the furnace. Well, someone would have to fill it up, and if you fill it up for one night, it'll last the whole day. My husband would have to do that, and he would usually do that before he goes to work, so that is done. But if there was heavy maintenance, they always had someone to come in and to do the heavy stuff. I think the man's name was Mr. Goodman. He owned a lot of the apartment buildings in that area, but then years later I heard that he took the money from the slum buildings and built that St. Regis Hotel down on the boulevard, Woodward and the boulevard. So we stayed there until he got my sister-in-law, and her husband, my husband's brother, and his wife to manage one of the buildings. It was getting kind of dangerous because she went to show an apartment and the guy raped her. So
Wow.
from that point on, we were really ready to move out. So we moved out of that area, but we were over there during the riots.
Wow. Backtracking just a little bit before we go on to that, how would you compare, and what do you remember about sort of comparing and contrasting growing up in Pittsburgh and then your first few years growing up in Detroit? Did you think of them as different cities or similar?
Different cities, because in Pittsburgh we grew up in an all Italian neighborhood, and there was none of this. Be aware. I would even tell my cousins when they come up to visit, just watch yourself.
Here in Detroit.
Here in Detroit, yeah. I mean, back then, things were getting kind of bad, and we had police forces, special police forces. We had the Big Four. We had technical units. We had gang squads. We had all kinds of police units that were out to curtail the gang and the fighting in the streets. So I told my cousins when they came, I said, if you get stopped, just throw your hands up. Don't resist. Back then it was getting that way. When I grew up in the old neighborhood off of Michigan Avenue over by the train station, it wasn't. When I started moving in closer to the area where the riot started, it started getting worse. I mean, it was people breaking into your house and stuff like that. Over there, it wasn't as bad. And see, I came up here when I was 9 or 10 years old. We lived next door to a Philippine couple, and everybody knew each other on the block, and it was like family. But when we started moving outward more, it was like you would have to start really watching your back.
Do you remember what building you were living in 1967 in the summer?
I don't remember the street. I know it was directly in back of Herman Kiefer Hospital.
Okay, we can look in Kiefer Hospital. You said?
Herman Kiefer Hospital they're the lodge. I think they're shutting it down. I came by there the other day, and it looks like they're closing Herman Kiefer Hospital. It was very, very active back then. People used it a lot. Is on the lodge in Claremont.
And how do you remember first hearing about or first noticing the violence and the unrest in July 1967?
Actually, some people might remember, but I remember that special groups such as the Black Panther and other militant groups had came into that area about the year before, trying to incite. Have you heard that?
A little bit.
Trying to incite riots. So we were actually really getting into Black Power, more power for the people, and that was when you had student unrest in a lot of the universities around the nation, and rumors. You hear of rumors and rumors of war and things that are going to happen. I actually personally witnessed the Black Panthers coming into the city and coming into that area, different militant groups, and we were all asked to participate if anything happens. That we were asked to participate, and it was laid out like a plan, we're going to come in and we're going to do this, and we want you to do this, and then back off.
What was it that they wanted people to do?
What they were going to do was to actually break open the store. You go in and get everything you want out. And as soon as you get out everything you want, then they were going to torch it and burn it down.
And this was a year before. This is 1966 that they first came in?
Yeah, it might not have been quite a year.
Okay, but sometime before.
Sometime before that happened. It was they were having problems out in California and other cities where they were having little riots, and it was like they were just looking for something. And it's kind of strange that the way this started, it happened to start just around the time that they came in. Now, it was said to me, I've always heard that like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning before the riots, the state police noticed heavy traffic on the highways coming in. And these people coming in, they actually turned around and went back. So, it holds some kind of truth, because in areas where there is unrest, you find outsiders to come in and incite it and get it going, and then they leave after they've gotten it going. So that's what I heard that had happened, is that they were coming in and going. I remember me, my husband, and the kids listening to speeches from different radical groups. I don't know exactly whether it was the Black Panthers, but lots of radical groups that would come in and stand on top of buildings and make a speech to the people about more power and Black power. We got to get rid of Whitey and all this kind of rhetoric. And I remember that.
What did you think about those speeches and demonstrations at that time you were hearing them?
Actually, because I was running an apartment building in that area, they actually asked to have a meeting in my building. And, of course, I didn't let them, but they were asking permission, could they hold meetings in the building, get with the people and talk to the people, kind of incite the people on. All I cared about at that time was getting out of that neighborhood and getting my children to safety.
What else do you remember about that last week in July? What were the sights and the sounds that you remember?
Oh, it was terrible. We were actually, where that happened, on the corner of Claremont, I think it was Claremont and 12th or one of
Yep.
those streets. Yeah.
12th and Claremont. Yep.
It's supposed to have happened on top of a printing shop.
Mm-hmm.
There was a blind pig there. Of course, I never frequented, but of course my husband and his brothers did, so they knew it was there. It would run after hours. And I think that's where it happened. In fact, I had a girlfriend that was in there not too long before there, and they had raided it. But the thing that I heard is that the police department was being paid money not to raid them. They knew it was like they turned their head to the fact that it was there and let it run. And I think that people were they were kind of upset because of the fact that they were raided. They shouldn't have been operating anyway after hours. It was illegal to operate after hours, and so it started there, and that gave people reason to spill it out into the streets. So it happened in the wee hours in the morning. I was asleep when I woke up. All I can hear was disturbance in the street and Molotov cocktails being thrown in buildings, and because we were like probably maybe 2 or 3 blocks off of 12th, and we can hear the running through the neighborhood, how people were getting out and getting involved in it.
Did your building stay safe throughout this?
No, actually, it didn't get burned down, but we were never safe from police raids.
Can you tell me more about that?
Constantly, they would raid the building. They were looking for snipers. They were looking on top of the roof for snipers. They were looking in people's building, in their apartments for snipers. I remember after the riot started and got going really heavy, how they would not only knock on your door. One particular night, we were all asleep. They take their gun and they would hit the door and break it in. So they had me, my husband, and the 2 little ones standing up alongside the wall with our hands up like this while they searched the apartment. They were looking for anything like stolen goods, rifles. I mean, people were breaking into the Light Guard Armory. They took machine guns. They took one of those big ones on tripods. They took one of those because we know a guy that had one, and he actually had it sitting up in his window, and he was shooting down on the street from his window. His window faced the street. His bay window faced the street. So he just opened the window and he would shoot down there at him.
So was he in effect a sniper?
Yeah, he was a sniper. There were snipers on top of our building.
Do you have any idea what they were looking for?
What, the snipers?
Yeah, at police or?
Right across the street from my house was a grade school.
Okay.
After the Detroit police couldn't handle it anymore, and it really got out of control. We only had one person in the area that was like a representative that actually they thought had some influence over blacks, and that was John Conyers. Conyers had a car dealer right there on the boulevard. I think in 12th or 14th Street, he had a car dealership there. So they sent John Conyers out to talk to the people, to your people, and see if you can get them to calm down. They threw bricks and everything at him. They didn't want to hear nothing he had to say. Right across the street from where we lived, the apartment building we lived in, was the grade school. Once the Detroit police lost control and they could not handle the people, they asked, please, could you send in, what do you call these, National Guards.
Yep.
So they sent in these National Guards from way up north, a bunch of white boys. You know how the blacks are going to feel about white boys coming in to calm down their area. That's what they were shooting at, back and forth. The white boys had no ammunition. They were ordered not to shoot, even if they did have it. They set up their camp right across in the school playground lot, right across from us. So they had pitched their tents, tanks, everything over there, but they weren't allowed to use them yet. So that went on and on and on and on for days. The looting, the burning, the skies in the daytime was black. You could not see anything. You could not go out of your house. You were afraid to go out. I went out to hang up some clothes or had the kids out in the yard, something like that. And the troops came through the yard and told me real quick to hurry up and get my kids and take them back in the house. They were shooting off the roof, and that's where they were trying to find whoever it was on the roof. There was other people in the apartment building, because this was like a 3-story apartment building. There were other people in the apartment building that were on the roof that was shooting off the roof. One of the girls came to me, knocked on the door and said she hadn't seen her brother in about a couple of days. She didn't know where he was. She finally found him at Belle Isle. They had turned Belle Isle into a camp to hold him. They used all the garages, police garages, all the police stations, all the cells were filled up because they started arresting people, one right after another. Sometimes you don't even have to be doing anything, just walking down the street. Then they had a curfew, so you couldn't be out after a certain time. You had to be in. And I got pictures of showing where you would stand in lines to get food, because everything was burnt down. You had nothing. You had no food. You had no milk. You had no diapers. There was nothing. We had to go across 8 Mile, straight out Woodward to 8 Mile, all up and down 8 Mile Road were National Guard troops, because Oakland County said, we don't want that. And you're not going to bring it across 8 Mile Road. So they were keeping you on this side. But if they let you in on that side, they escorted you in. You went to the store, you bought what you had to get, and they escorted you right back out.
Was that a fairly civil process, going in with them and out the store?
Yeah.
Nobody gave you a hard time about wanting to go shopping there, or?
No. Okay. But the prices.
Oh, they gouged?
Oh, God, did they gouge. Oh. But you needed it.
Right. What are you
going to do?
What it is. What are you going to do?
I know.
Oh, my goodness.
You can imagine what a loaf of bread costs and a thing of milk for the babies.
How were your kids through all this? How old were they at that time?
They were 3 and 4.
Okay. So they might remember a little bit, but they were
too
small.
young. Yeah, real small.
Do you remember anything particularly about them and how they responded to this? Like, could they tell that this was weird, that something unusual was happening?
They were traumatized. They couldn't sleep at night. Mm. They ended up sleeping with us because they were afraid of the men with the black masks on.
Yeah.
And see, these guys, you couldn't see their face because they had, helmets with the thing over.
With the whole front face guard and everything.
Yeah, it was all black. Mm. After
riot gear.
Riot gear, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And when they finally gave them permission to start shooting, they start shooting at everything that moved. So you better not go out after a certain time at night. I forget what the curfew was, but my husband happened to be working nights, but he had to show his badge so that he can go across 12th Street, that he had to go to work. Where there's a command post, he had to show it.
It was just his work papers from Chrysler that said, I'm an employee here?
Yeah. So he had to do that to go to work and to come back home.
And the plants never closed during the whole time? He worked every day?
Some of the days he didn't go in. He couldn't get in. but the plants were open.
He couldn't get in because they wouldn't let him cross 12th Street,
Right,
even though he had the work papers.
right. All depends on what command post he was going through.
So it all depended by the day exactly what was happening then.
Mhm.
Somebody from up top
'Cause
says let people through. Somebody up top says
Mhm.
nobody.
So sometimes he would have to turn around and
Oh.
come back because they wouldn't let him through to go into work.
Wow.
I think like towards the end, um, he didn't go in at all. But at the beginning of it, he was able to go in. When Detroit police was handling it, you were more freely to move around. But once the National Guards came in and took over, you weren't allowed to move as freely. People were writing on the side of their buildings, black only, black owned, so that you could skip theirs and not burn theirs down. But it was organized. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. They knew exactly where they wanted to hit.
When you say they, who do you mean?
I don't know which groups were involved. I don't know exactly which ones were involved in this. But it was,
The type of people who were preaching what you were saying before,
Yeah.
similar to the Black Panthers, if not maybe necessarily that group.
right.
Okay.
Any group that got really militant. See, I was actually more Martin Luther King type person. I was not Huey Newton and H. Rap Brown and all
Peaceful,
of those.
nonviolent resistance.
Nonviolent resistant type person. I was not the violent type, but I listened to some of their doctrine, which some of their things they were saying, but they were saying it in a way, just like the other day I read where the Black Panther actually was responsible for WIC, the program that we have now, to feed the women, the infants, and the children. But they did some good in the area. They could see some areas that needed, in the black area most especially. And I drive around the city, and to me, it really hasn't changed. The buildings are still burnt down and crumbly, and the ones that did tear down, there's empty lots. Right over a block over from me, a whole block burned. Fire department couldn't get in to put the fires out because they were happening too fast. And then they would turn the fire department trucks over and beat them up and wouldn't let them put out the fires. And it's a good thing my building didn't get torched, but a lot of buildings around me got torched. And I stood in my doorway with the kids on my hip, watching buildings after buildings burn around us.
You said even before all of this chaos from that week in July, it was a goal of yours to move out of that neighborhood to get somewhere else. When did you ultimately move out of the West Side?
Probably
area
about
there?
a year after that. Let's see, that was in '67, that riot.
Right.
I think we were out of there, and I got into my house in Northwest, where I'm at now, probably about '68 or '69,
And where's that?
over on in the college district, U of D college district. I'm in that area.
Okay. What street?
Prairie.
Or Prairie. So
And
that's near
Livernois.
Livernois.
Near U of D.
Okay, so Livernois and like 7 Mile?
Yeah.
6 Mile?
Yeah, 7.
Okay. And can you tell me about that neighborhood?
When
your,
I
your
moved over there,
impressions right when you moved in there first.
when we moved in there, it was all, let's see, on my block, it might have been, I was probably the third black family to move in. It was mostly all Jewish area.
Mm-hmm.
But then soon after that, they started moving out. So they started going out more to Oak Park instead of
Right.
in that area. So we moved in over there. The schools were so much better. And the whole area was so much better. And it was a relief to get away from over there.
Is that the Mumford area?
Yeah.
That's where your kids went to school?
No, my kids went to Cass Tech. All 4 of mine
Okay.
went to Cass Tech. But yeah, they it was so much better. And I was so relieved to get them out there. I was glad my kids weren't teenagers or young people, back then that would be out there and get shot. Because I've heard and seen lots of people that were injured and still are injured from the riots where they got shot, paralyzed, in wheelchairs, stuff like that.
Sure.
One of the ladies out here said that her father took pictures. I think it was her father took pictures. He just got out there with his camera and started taking pictures. Everything.
Were there any tensions in the neighborhood between the black families and the Jewish families?
Over in Northwest area?
Yeah, when you were moving in there.
No. No.
Everybody got along?
Everybody
the
got
kids
along.
played with each other in the neighborhood?
Mm-hmm. Doctor's office on the corner, and he lived his office was in the front, he lived in the back. His little kids. We were over there with, what's his name? Carl Levin?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Carl Levin in that area was this congressman now that's, oh God, the black guy that's always in trouble. Cushenberry?
Yeah.
All that area was like doctors, lawyers, and people like that. My kids went to school with Levin's kids.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a
Professional, educated parents for the most part.
Lieberman, his little daughter, Amy, I remember her, was all down, would play with my kids.
And you're still in that house on Prairie, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that neighborhood now and the changes that you've seen since you moved in?
There's some changes in that neighborhood, but not really bad changes. We have our share of B&Es. There's drugs. But the neighborhood in all is basically a pretty solid neighborhood because the houses are built solid. And they're not these houses they're building now. So that's a good, sound neighborhood. If they're going to, bring back Detroit, these areas like the Boston, Edison, the Chicago area, where you have these good, solid homes.
They're brick instead of the frame houses.
Yeah, they're brick instead of the frame houses, and that's the way mine is a brick house. It's a nice, solid house. They don't make houses like this anymore. They don't make neighborhoods like these anymore. And so we know that because we see a lot of people that are coming in trying to buy up all of these houses, and most of the houses in the neighborhood people have lost because of foreclosure. They really didn't want to give up their house. They just couldn't afford to keep it anymore. But these houses in that neighborhood is pretty solid houses. You find some companies come in, will buy up maybe a whole slew of houses in that particular area. Management company. We see people coming from out of state buying up houses. And they'll flip them, fix them up, turn them around, and sell them, for a higher price. But, yeah, it's a pretty good neighborhood.
Is that good for the neighborhood, do you think, that people are doing that?
Flipping houses?
Yeah.
I just wish that it wasn't people from out of state. I wish it wasn't these management companies that's taking advantage of the fact that these houses are here.
Gotcha. More individuals.
More individuals, and I think I think with families that we know of, families that need housing, I think those people should have a good shot at it. I know at one time they had a drive to try to get more our public officials to come back into the city of Detroit to live. And they were offering them these houses over in the Boston, Edison area to come back. And they would get them pretty cheap. You'd have to put money in them. Like you can get a house over there maybe $8,000-$10,000, but you would end up putting $70,000 or $80,000 in the house to bring it back up to the way it was. They had some big, beautiful houses over there. Because we looked into that when my daughter was looking for a house, and the people told her she had people to come in and look at the house, how much it would cost her to bring it up. And she said the house would, you would have to put at least $70,000 in this house to bring it up to par. So I wish that more people were allowed to do that. Then you wouldn't see so many people leaving the city of Detroit, because I've thought about it quite often. I've thought about going to Sterling Heights, Macomb, here lately.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What has kept you from making a move like that?
All the ties to that house, but I have to let them go. Sometimes you have to let it go. I have so much stuff in that house that are old memories, and I have to start, getting rid of it. And it would be nice to move to that area because my girlfriend just moved out there. And I've been looking that way, out 18 and a half, 20-something mile road, Romeo area, and just get out of Detroit. But I wouldn't give up what I have in Detroit. I would keep my house in Detroit. I have 2 houses, but I would keep my house in Detroit and maybe just rent them out.
Gotcha.
I think Detroit, I have a feeling it's going to turn around, but I don't think that I'll probably live long enough to see that happen. I hope that it happens. It happens soon, but I don't think that I'll be around when it turns around. I ride around in the city of Detroit, and I said there's so much work that has to be done. There is a lot of work that has to be done. We need to start tearing down all these ones that was burnt down during '67.
Start fresh.
Start fresh. Just level them to the ground. There are so many houses, and you can count them in one neighborhood that's all boarded up. Drug dealers are using them as their what they call trap houses. Young kids are afraid to go down the street to school because they might get snatched, pulled into these empty houses. People are getting killed for nothing, over nothing. People are afraid to leave their homes, especially older people. Older people are being encouraged to take classes to get their CPLs.
What do you think? What's the most important thing or the first thing the city can do to get this moving in the right direction so that these things aren't happening anymore?
You know what I used to say all the time? There's people making decisions, and they're bringing in all of these, what do they call these? This one guy they brought in from another city to try to turn the city around. His background, I think.
City manager?
Yeah.
Emergency manager?
Emergency manager. They're bringing in these people that's talking from an expert point of view as far as economics and maybe
urban development.
Yeah. See, I thought about doing that because I got 3 degrees, master's degrees, and one of them is from Wayne State. And when I started at Wayne State, I started in a program called urban development. They phased it out. And I asked them why. They said, well, we find that there's no need for this program. Well, you do need people from the city of Detroit who is knowledgeable about the city of Detroit and what they need to work into that area. And I used to always say, why don't you just go ask the people? You want to know what we can put into this neighborhood to make this a better neighborhood? Ask the neighborhood.
Seems simple enough.
That's simple enough. Just ask the people. What do you want for your neighborhood? What can we do? What can we give you to make your neighborhood a better neighborhood? And listen to the people. Listen to them because they're the one that's going to make it happen. So you go in and think you know what they need and you put it in there. If that's not what they need, they're going to rebel against it or either tear it down or either not cooperate with what's going on. They used to have in each neighborhood city halls, which I thought was a good idea. But how much power does the neighborhood city halls have if you go to them with problems? Now, in my neighborhood, it's Northwest Activity Center. And they have meetings there at Northwest Activity Center. But what good is that? I mean, are you taking this information that we're giving you? We used to have them come to our churches, some of the city officials. And they would ask questions. Benny Napoleon, which I know too. Benny Napoleon, all them guys. Sit up in the front with your questions. Everybody would get up, stand there, and talk on the mic. There is a house next door to me, and there's drug activity, and I've been calling and calling and calling and calling, and nobody seems to come out. Okay, write that down. As you writing that down, what is the address? We're going to do something about it. Nothing is done about it. Talk to the people. Find out what it is they want. Talk to the young people. They're the ones that's got to live here.
Well, hopefully more people will hear that message and start doing that soon. Is there anything else you'd like to share today?
That's it. Other than that, I love the city of Detroit. I grew up with Coleman Young era. I worked with him and worked with his team. I think Coleman Young was the best mayor that we've ever had. Some people didn't like him because of his mouth and the way he told people just the way it was, and that's the way it was. Coleman Young.
All right. Thanks for sharing with us today, Donna.
Okay.